Yeah.
Welcome. It's great to have everyone here and some old faces from Deep Time and old faces from Cosmic Vespers, all looking radiant and very spring-like. This is the 1 year anniversary of offering Cosmic Vespers, and it has been just the greatest joy for our team. I'm going to speak for them in this case, and just know that it delights us that it's speaking to you in some way to have you here today, whether it's for Sarbmeet's wisdom or the wisdom of times past. But today is somewhat special, and Sarbmeet was invited here when he was talking about quantum fields, and it was just part of his conversation that he hit into this wildly spiritual phrasing that he didn't intend to, but there it was. And so next thing he knew, he was invited here, and we are the beneficiaries. Ah,
Thank you.
it's great to have you. I'd like to open with some announcements by Marianne, and then Marianne's going to open us with a chant. And thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Um, I'm going to share my screen so I can show you our calendar because that's probably the easiest way. Um, so, what's today? Today's Thursday, all right? And we've got Song Path on Tuesday, a Mystics course. And if you could mute yourselves, that would be really lovely.
Yeah.
If everybody else, like I'm seeing Christopher, maybe if you could mute yourself.
I'll try to mute from here as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And so Song Path, if you like the kind of songs you're going to hear, try Roxanne Schuler on Tuesday evening. It says 7, it's actually 7:30. And our Mystics course is we're almost finished with this certification course, and we've got another 3 ready to run in the fall, including Penny's rendition of Cosmogenesis, which is happening at a very beautiful time of the year and promises Brian's swim. And we've got Qigong and Haiku. That's what Ache Brocades is. It's happening in spurts and with lots of time in between. And then there's a processing group on the that should be the 4th Friday, shouldn't it? I'll clarify that with Nathan. So instead of the 20th, it should be the 27th for the processing group. And first Thursdays will be up again. It won't be Cosmic Vespers, and I don't remember what it is. Do you have it right there, Bob?
It's Global Kinship with J.D. Stillwater.
Oh, who was at our gathering? Great. Okay, so I'm gonna stop this share if I can, and I want to invite us, if you have a candle, to light your candle. I mean, birthday candle, right? 1 year old. And if you don't, that's okay. You can hold up your finger or thumb, or you can hold up a candle on your phone, or you can use your wonderful creative imagination. And we just want to remember the light, that original light of the first flaring forth, as we talk about this wonderful intersection today of the ancient cosmology and quantum physics, which is new, but old, and what the ancient sages say. So I'm just going to set that down. And then I have to stop this share in order to start another share. We're going to open with a chant. And this is a chant by Alexa Rose. Here, let me do this. And what I'm going to try to do here is drop into the chat the lyrics for you, because they're very simple, but I think a lot of people feel a little bit more comfortable if they have the lyrics right with them. And so it's called Created by Sound. Since, let me see now. Can I still get into my chat? I should be able to, shouldn't I? Here we go. So this is for everyone by Alexa Rose. Very easy, very easy. And so I'm going to invite you, if you want to move, if you want to dance, if you want to stand, if you want to close your eyes and listen, however you want to experience this, I'm probably going to sing along with her, and I hope that doesn't bother anybody. I think this is,
But we do ask that everyone else keep their themselves muted, please.
yeah. Well, and unfortunately, because this is coming through my sound computer, you might hear me too. So we are created by sound by Alexa Sunshine Rose.
We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe, singing with the trees, singing with the song of the universe, singing with the whales, singing with the honeybees. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe, singing with the trees, singing with the song of the universe, singing with the whales, singing with the honeybees. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe, singing with the trees, singing with the song of the universe, singing with the whales, singing with the honeybees. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe. We are created by sound. We are created by the song of the universe, singing with the trees, singing with the song of the universe, singing with the whales, singing with the song of the universe, singing with the trees, singing with the song of the universe, singing with the whales, singing with the honeybee.
Oh,
With the light of the sun, I shine, I shine, I shine.
thanks, Marianne. That was great. I want to just briefly inform you of a dream I had last night, which was that I showed up for a job as an Amazon semi truck driver that I was totally unqualified for. And so I was trying to make up I knew what I was doing on the job. And I directly relate it to the topic of physics. I have an intuitive sense of it, but boy, it goes in kind of funny. And I believe I might not be alone, but I thought my dream world let me know to be humble today, especially. We stand at a curious intersection where science, spirit, and song might dare to touch, not collapsing into each other, not explaining one another away, but to listen into the field where certainty slips across to wonder, and the cosmos speaks to us in pulses. Tonight, and this afternoon, we are so grateful to have Sarbmeet join us, and he brings with him not ideas, but invitations. He's walked the sacred path and the scientific method, and he's here to speak about quantum fields. Now, many of us have heard the term quantum fields theory, and it's the most accurate field of the physical world we have. Everything is made of fields, not particles, not objects, not even energy as a standalone thing, but as fields. A field is something that exists everywhere, a kind of invisible presence permeating all space. Each type is a fundamental particle. The electron, the photon, the quark is not a separate thing, but an excitation in the field. So you're not made of atoms, you're made of field vibrations. We are a fluctuation in the field being held, moved, and changed by other fields. What we call reality is made up of fields, not things, says Carlo Rovelli, who is a physicist and author of Reality is Not What It Seems. There are no things in the quantum realm, only relationships, only entanglements. This is where quantum physics starts to sound like mysticism, like sacred relationality, like the teachings of so many lineages who have told us you are not separate. Our fundamental delusion of humanity is to suppose that I am here and you are out there. And that comes from the Zen world. It doesn't prove these teachings. It does not replace mystery with mechanism, but it echoes them. It tells us that the thingness of the world is an illusion of scale, that what appears to be solid, fixed, and discrete is actually relational and alive. Underneath what we can touch, there's a field, and the field is not a passive backdrop, but a participant. So our guest is a wonderful instructor of this, bringing lots of curious minds like ours together to learn this world. And he does it often through deep time, but he's also a professor of physics at Brookdale Community College, where he's been recognized for his teaching innovations. He received a PhD in theoretical particle physics from the California Institute of Technology, after which he worked for many years in wireless telecommunication research at Bell Labs. Sarbmeet is also an instructor at Deep Time, an organization which has a mission of orienting humanity to an evolving, interconnected universe as a context within which to visualize a prosperous and peaceful future. As a member of New Jersey's Monmouth Center of World Religions and Ethical Thought, he founded an interfaith youth leadership program called Mosaic, mobilizing our students for action to build interfaith community. And for this was awarded the Earl Thomas Teasley Humanitarian Award, promoting peace building within the community. Sarbmeet is sought-after speaker on topics that range from cosmology to spirituality, and the author of 2 TED Talks, Chaos to Cosmos and Science Reimagined, Harmony Through Awe. It is our great pleasure to have you with us, Sarbmeet, and we look forward to me learning how to drive a truck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You remind me, Penny, when I give talks on science, I often have people come to me and they say, oh my gosh, that was amazing, but it gave me a headache. I couldn't understand all of the stuff that you talked about. So I actually have a request of sorts to people. don't make it look like that Amazon truck. I suggest that you let what I have to say speak to you in whichever way it comes across to you. And so I would suggest that it's not important to understand all the details, but to focus more on the gestalt of what it is about. So be kind to yourself, I guess is what I would say. Um, Penny asked me to put in a little plug for another two upcoming presentations that are happening actually on both on Thursdays as well. One of them a week from today, and the other one 2 weeks from today. Just to give you a little bit of context on that, just about a year ago, on the 20th of April, here in New Jersey, we celebrated an important event. It was the 60th anniversary of the discovery of the cosmic background radiation using what we now call the horn antenna, which happens to be in the town that I live in, which is Homedale, New Jersey. And so it was very fortunate that Jennifer of Deep Time was able to organize a wonderful get together where people from Deep Time and elsewhere as well came in person to attend, first of all, an opening ceremony for a park that is going to be built where the horn antenna is, and hopefully an education center that will be built there. And secondly, a series of talks in the building where much of the research for that was done. And during this last year, Jennifer has worked very hard, along with some help from us, to create a video of that occasion. It's beautifully done. It's only 9 minutes long. If you haven't seen it, I suggest that you find a way to do it. It's, I can certainly offer the link if anybody's interested. But that video was actually shown about a little more than a month ago online. A lot of people came to that. In fact, 550 some people came for that screening. Maybe a few of the people here in this audience may have done that as well. And so what we are now doing is to have a couple of follow-up sessions to explain the science behind that huge discovery. And so that's what I was intending to let you know about. On the 12th of June at 7 p.m. and then again on the 19th of June at 7 p.m. There will be two Zoom sessions. They're free. Registration, though, is required, and they're advertised on the Deep Time website. And if anybody's interested, you can either approach me or Penny and be happy to give you further information on that. Okay, with that, I want to move ahead with today's topic. So let me see if I can pull up my slides here. Here we go. And let me try to make this full screen. Okay, that should be good. All right, yeah, I see that thumbs up, so wonderful. So I'm going to talk to you about quantum fields and entanglement, as my title suggests here. But I also want to touch upon some of the metaphors that come out of this deep and wonderful science. And so I will start by explaining some of the science, and then we'll go on to some of the metaphors, and then we'll open up to Q&A for anybody that has questions or shares. So let me start with a little quote that I'm sure most of you have heard perhaps many times over. It's actually a little poem by T.S. Eliot, and it says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploration will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So I say this because I'm going to talk to you about some of the amazing surprises that the universe has given us as we try to explore and investigate and study what reality truly is. So there's many such instances, but I'll talk to you about a few of them that have to do with the subject that we have today. So yeah, every now and then the universe gives us a surprise by turning things on their head. Well, one time that happened is when we were trying to figure out what our place is in the universe. So the Greek philosophers, like Aristotle and Plato, had a very beautiful explanation of our cosmos. And naturally, given what we observe from day to day, with the sun going around, rising from the east and setting in the west, with the moon doing the same thing, the stars doing the same thing, it makes sense for us to think of ourselves at the center of the universe. And that is indeed what the picture was that emerged and stayed with us for about 2,000 years. And that is the picture of the earth being at the center, we being the focus of the attention of all the heavenly bodies around us. Give me 1 second here. And then what happened? Well, with Copernicus, we found out that that was entirely the wrong way to look at things. And, oops, let's see. What turned out is that we were situated in a nondescript, unknown, forgotten corner of a vast universe with trillions of galaxies and quadrillions of stars in it. But that was only a beginning, because that led us to find a new center to which we belong, and that is our cosmic story, which I'm not going to be going into today. But here's another thing that happened. From time immemorial, people have been asking about what exactly is the void in which we live? What is the space that we live? And our first ideas of that was that it was a nothing in which the universe is situated. And Newton, for example, proclaimed that the void was the stage on which God created the universe. So the void was a container, it was emptiness. But what we have found with science is that it's the reverse that is true. Not only is the space not empty, and we'll talk a lot about that today, but in fact, space or the void is the source of all the matter that exists in the universe. It emanated from the void itself. And here is one other surprise, which hits very close to what we are going to talk about today, and that is the nature of matter. That was another question that has been investigated and explored for millennia and centuries. And we made a lot of progress trying to see what it was, but it turned out instead of these tiny indestructible particles that Newton had hypothesized as being the core of the universe from which the universe is made, what we now find out is that the universe is made out of matter, which are just ripples in the vast ocean of quantum fields. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here is the progress that is depicted on this particular page. We figured out that matter was made up from molecules. We found out that molecules were made up of atoms. We found out that atoms were actually made up of a core inside, which we call the nucleus, with electrons going around it. Then we started to investigate what that core was, and we found that it was made up of protons and neutrons. We further studied these protons and neutrons and found out that they also were composites, and they had something called quarks inside of it. But as we went on and on, some very interesting things started to emerge. First of all, we couldn't find any further structure inside these quarks, or for that matter, even the electrons that go around the atoms. And these particles had no structure, no substance to them, not even a size associated with them, which led us to a very strange situation. And as we kept moving, we found out that at the very bottom, the particles are not what exist, but just excitations in a quantum field. And one of the things that moved us towards that discovery is the fact that these particles seem to transform one into another and seem to disappear and seem to appear, which was very difficult to explain with all the theories that were there until the quantum field theory came along. Someone needs to go on mute, I think. I heard some noise. Okay. So, so as I said, what we have discovered now is elementary particles are just ripples of energy in a quantum field. So let's try and figure out what a quantum field is. That's a tough one, right? A quantum field is certainly invisible. It's also intangible. It's absolutely non-material. And this is perhaps a new word for some of you. It's almost impossible to visualize in our minds because we can visualize things that have a certain reality, a structure to them. But a quantum field is nothing of that sort. So despite the fact that, as I said, it's non-visualizable, I'm actually going to try and visualize it for you because we humans have a tough time with abstractions. And if we can find a way to put some kind of a visualization on it, it helps us to put them in place and understand them. So here's my rendition of a quantum field on a screen, on a two-dimensional screen, which is the best we can do here. So the empty void, as I said before, is not empty. It is full of quantum fields that permeate all of space. And this is my best version of what a quantum field looks like. So let me explain a little bit here. What you're seeing forth is what I would describe as restless energy. What are these spots that are blinking in front of you? Well, they're not material. They're not anything that we can relate to in our day-to-day lives. As a matter of fact, what is blinking in front of your eyes is what we call pure potentiality. In other words, the potential, the possibility of something to emerge from this quantum field is what is showing this restless energy that you're seeing in front of you. So we can call a quantum field as a vibrating field of potentiality. This is, the best definition that I can offer to you. So let's see. So now that we know what a quantum, or at least we don't know, but we have at least some way to visualize what a quantum field really is. What are these particles that we constantly deal with when we do physics? We make molecules and atoms and so forth from them. Well, it turns out that these particles are essentially excitedness or a disturbance in this quantum field, very much like a ripple in an ocean. So an ocean is calm, and then we do something to it, we disturb it in some way, and then there is a ripple effect that happens in that localized area where the disturbance is. That energy that is associated with that rippling of the quantum field is essentially what a particle is. And so in this particular screen, I've been showing two areas that you can barely make out where there is that little concentration of extra energy that has been injected into this field. And that is what a particle is in a sense. So what happens is that when you inject energy into a quantum field, that particle essentially takes on the properties of the quantum field. So the particle itself doesn't have those properties. It's the field that has those properties. And the quantum and the particle essentially inherits it from that field. All right, so we said the universe is now made up of these quantum fields. How many of them are there, and how do we categorize them? So this is where something called the standard model of physics comes into play. After all, decades of research that started in the 1940s and is still continuing, we have been able to detect more and more of these quantum fields. And we now have a not a complete set, but a set as complete as we can possibly do at this point in time, and a set of quantum fields that seems to explain more or less everything that we see. But yes, there are certainly gaps there, which I will talk about. So what you see here is a bunch of squares with letters in them, and those are symbols for these quantum fields. You don't need to understand what the letters mean, but essentially, what we have is two kinds of quantum fields. One are what constitute matter, or what matter is made up from, and the others are what we call force fields, which actually mediate between matter and create all of the interaction and the forces between them. So first of all, this is a fairly large number, but it turns out that many of these quantum fields, even though we have been able to find them, are unstable. And therefore, they are not part of the matter that we see around us. So here I have rayed out the ones in the middle there that really do not constitute or are not a part of matter at all, because they are just very unstable. So what you have is now a column of quantum fields on the left-hand side. I'll tell you now what some of these letters stand for. U stands for up quark, D stands for down quark, and E stands for electron. And then there is a little Greek letter at the bottom, which is looks like a V, but it's actually a nu in Greek, and that stands for what we call a neutrino. Turns out that the neutrino is very much part of our universe, except that it is a very ghostly, fleeting particle, and it does not exist in the matter that we generally see around us. However, neutrinos are everywhere. The sun creates trillions and trillions of them. And, there are many other sources of these neutrinos. So you'll be surprised to know that we are constantly surrounded by these particles, except that they're so ghostly that we cannot feel or even experience them in any way. The statistics is that every second of time, there are 100 trillion neutrinos that are passing through our body. And these neutrinos are so wispy that they can actually go right through the Earth without interacting with anything else. So we generally don't consider them when we consider, what matter is made up of. And then on the right-hand side, you have these more reddish kind of quantum fields, and those are the force fields. So you might have heard that there are 4 fundamental forces of nature. Each one is represented by a quantum field. And then there is a 5th force now that was very recently discovered, called the Higgs field, which was in fact discovered in 2012. And Mr. Higgs, who first postulated this field, was still alive and got a Nobel Prize for it. But the 4 fundamental forces are not quite represented on this chart. Well, first of all, I just wanted to make sure that you understand that the U, D, and E are the quantum fields that matter is made up of. And then on this side, I wanted to make sure that you realize that there is a missing piece here, and that is the force of gravity. So G is a quantum field that mediates the strong force. That Greek letter gamma is one that basically talks about the electromagnetic field. And then there are 2 particles, Z and W, that represent what we call the weak force. And H is for Higgs. And then gravity is missing. And the reason is that we have not yet figured out how to write a quantum theory of gravity. And so we don't have a self-consistent way to understand the gravitational field. But we do know that once we understand it, that it constitutes the very void, the space and time that I talked about. That itself, it turns out, is a field, and that is the field that actually gives us gravity. Oops. So we have all these fields in the void, they're overlapping each other. So how can we imagine them? The best way that I have to offer here is think of them as ways in which the void is conditioned by them. And I have one example that I try to give. None of these analogies are perfect, so take them with a grain of salt. But let's look at our own air, which is invisible. But of course, we know it's made up of material particles, unlike the quantum fields. But if you take air, you can condition the air in many ways. You could actually talk about the humidity in the air. You could talk about the temperature of the air. You could talk about the pressure in the air. These are all properties of this invisible air that we talk about. Similarly, each of the quantum field renders a property to the void in which it resides, in which it is embedded. So I sometimes try to indicate that with colors, though quantum fields, of course, do not have any colors. That wouldn't make any sense anyway. But here is a representation of an electron field, for example. I colored it pink. Here is a representation of the up quark field. Here is a representation of the down quark field. And so we can imagine all of these as being there in the void at the same time. It's like putting a bunch of color transparencies one on top of the other, and all of them residing in there at the same time. Okay, so now we talked about the mediation, we talked about force fields. So let me try to explain a little bit of that. But before that, I just want to emphasize one thing that I just mentioned earlier on, that a particle is nothing other than energy injected into a field. And so that energy can actually be knocked from one field to the other. And when that happens, we say that the particle has transformed into another particle. So the best way I have of representing it on the screen here is to just show two sides. Of course, there are no two sides. All these fields overlap. But if you think of them as two sides, then basically what we have is energy basically slipping from one field into the other field, acquiring the properties of that other field and becoming that other particle. And this generally doesn't happen very easily. We know that we can actually make it happen in our particle accelerators, where we bring two very energetic particles and collide them together. And so creates a kind of a jolt and puts this energy into fields. And in fact, we can create hundreds of particles with that energetic jolt by simply infusing energy into the quantum fields. And we do that all the time in these particle accelerators. So I'm going to touch upon three aspects of these quantum fields, and then talk about some metaphors that arise from each one of them. The first one is relationality. Penny already touched upon that in the beginning, and I'm going to talk about the oneness associated with them, and then, of course, entanglement. So let's talk first about relationality. So relationality emerges from the fact that the properties of these quantum fields are properties only as they relate to how the relationship that they have with other quantum fields. In other words, a quantum field has no properties of its own at all. And so since quantum fields relate to each other through the mediation of these force fields, so what we talk about is the strength with which one matter field couples with a force field. And depending on what force field that is, that renders a property to that quantum field. In fact, it turns out that force fields can interact with each other as well. So they can have properties that have to do with their strength of interaction. And so in general, a quantum field is very simple in the sense that it only has 5 or less properties. And we generally characterize them as mass, spin, and then a certain number of coupling constants that relate to, again, what I spoke about is the strength with which they interact with each other. Turns out that mass is also a strength of coupling with the Higgs field. So the Higgs field is what actually renders mass to all the particles in these quantum fields. And the spin, it turns out, is a way in which these particles interact with space and time, which is the gravity force field. So in other words, all of these properties are essentially their interaction with other force fields. So the point that I want to make here is that a quantum field on its own would not have any properties but for the interaction that it has with other fields. And so in a sense, the primary thing about what the universe is made up of are these relationships, not the fields themselves. You take these relationships away, and you really have nothing left. There is no quantum field. The quantum field is made up, in a sense, of these relationships. That's what this potentiality that we talk about is all about. So the relationality is primary. And one way to sort of show that is on this little diagram that I have, where the circles are quantum fields, a representation of quantum fields. I mean, of course, quantum fields are not like that. They're not circles, they're not particles or anything like that, but this is a way to represent them on a piece of paper or a screen. And then the dotted lines between them are the interactions. And so every property of each quantum field is essentially the sum of its interactions. So you take these 5 interactions it has, and then take them, and that gives you the quantum field in the center. And so that is what we mean. That's what we mean when we say that the universe is really a web of relationality. It is not really even made up of quantum fields, but it's made up of the relationality between those quantum fields. So that's about relationality. Let's talk a little bit about oneness. So we talked about all these different quantum fields. It turns out that when we look at the early universe, which is when space was much more compacted because space has been expanding, it turns out that if we think about the reverse process where we kind of compact space to bring it closer and closer to the flaring forth point, we find that these vibrational energies in the quantum fields become more and more excited. And we sometimes refer to that as an increase in their temperature. But as they get hotter and hotter, these quantum fields and their properties start to merge together to look as if they're part of something common. And so what we find is that all of the matter fields that we talked about, they merge into one matter field, and then all the force fields merge into another field. And then these two fields kind of have this wonderful dance between them that creates a singular unity. And that singular unity is what we represent with our mathematics and our equations and so forth. And sometimes you may have heard about the theory of everything. Well, this is what theory of everything is. It's that singular unity that we describe from which the universe arose. So it turns out that these quantum fields arise from a oneness. Of course, this is a very rich oneness because it has all the dimensionality in it that is needed for these fields to emanate from it. So it's not sort of just a uniform oneness, if you might think about it. It's a very rich kind of oneness. Again, I have no way to actually describe it to you other than through pictures, some art that we can do. And so here is a picture that I just took from somewhere, and it's my representation. It's not a depiction of anything that you can describe with the mathematics or anything like that, but it's just to show you that this oneness is a rich oneness. And so what turn out to be the amazing dimensions of this oneness is what eventually break apart and give us the quantum fields that we have in the universe today. And so this is a diagram that I've shown in the past, which kind of depicts the flaring forth where everything was together in this oneness. And then over a period of time, as the universe expanded and cooled, one by one, these various force fields that we have today in the universe broke apart. And in fact, it was during the breaking apart of one of these force fields, the strong force actually, when the universe expanded rapidly from being smaller than an atom to being the size of I think about a peach or something like that in the matter of a trillionth of a second. And that is the process which we now describe as the Big Bang. That is the flaring forth that happened in the process of this breaking apart of these field forces. Okay, so my last thing that I want to talk about now is entanglement. Entanglement is another amazing thing that is a characteristic of quantum fields. So as we said, a particle can be represented as basically a constellation of energy that exists inside or is embedded inside a quantum field, an excitation of it. So While the quantum field, as we said, basically only has relational properties, a particle does have some other properties that we can assign to it. For example, a particle has a place, a location where it's supposed to be. It also has an orientation that we sometimes characterize with what we call a spin. So those sorts of things can be related to the particle itself. But when two particles entangle with each other, what happens is that these properties that the particles have are essentially given up. They're given up to the new whole that is created through entanglement. And the beauty of entanglement is that in the process of entanglement, this whole gains powers and properties and so forth that each of the particles didn't really have at all. But the process of entanglement endows the whole with this new kinds of things. So what kind of things are we talking about? First of all, let's think about a very common entangled whole, the atom. The atom is essentially an entanglement of the particles that are inside of it. So we can take the simplest atom, the hydrogen atom. The hydrogen atom has just two particles, an electron and a proton. And these electron and protons are entangled with each other. And through that entanglement, they are able to generate patterns of energy, which have to do with the potentiality that is created of the various locations in which a particle could be found if we actually went in and tried to find out where those particles were, which means we would have to break the entanglement, and then we would give back to the particle the property that it had given up in order to be entangled. The beauty of these things, you might have heard, is that particles can entangle across large distances. They can, and we have already entangled particles that are about 100 miles apart in our laboratories, but we believe that you can entangle particles that are across the galaxy, if you will. And when you do something with one of those particles, immediately the other particle responds in a certain way. And that is what's so mysterious about the whole process of entanglement. So what does entanglement do for an atom? Some amazing things. So first of all, the picture that I'm showing you on the right-hand side is a picture of potentiality. It is not the shape of a hydrogen atom. A hydrogen atom does not have any shape. It is simply showing you in terms of where there is a higher possibility or potential of finding a particle and where there is a lower potential of finding a particle. So these patterns are really patterns of potentiality and possibility and nothing more than that. And when you find these entanglement patterns, what you find is that you can put energy into them, and they actually, this is where the word quantum jump comes from. A certain amount of energy will immediately make them jump from one configuration of potentiality to another configuration of potentiality. And here are some really beautiful pictures of just a hydrogen atom in terms of all the different potentiality patterns that it can be cast into. And it all depends on what energy you put into a hydrogen atom. It will cast into these beautiful patterns. These patterns are not just geometrical shapes, but they're also alive. They are throbbing. They're vibrating. So again, I'm restricted to the screen to kind of show you what it looks like, but this is a bit of a representation of what an atom might look like in terms of the way in which the potentiality changes over time. So there's rotational, there's pulsing, there's all sorts of things that are going on inside an atom. So there's incredible beauty here in terms of the shapes and the geometry that we see. Now, another thing that an atom can do through its entanglement is that it can discern one kind of a frequency of light from another. An atom only will absorb certain frequencies of light and will let other frequencies pass right through. It will also emit only certain frequencies of light and will not emit other frequencies of light, which is why we associate color with so many of the things that we see in our universe. The color comes from the frequency of light which the atoms in that particular object are able to emit. Also, the entangled shapes of potentiality that I showed you, is absolutely critical in deciding how these atoms come together into complex molecules. And these molecules can then take on incredible shapes. And those shapes are emanating from those potentiality patterns. And in fact, in the long run, as the universe evolves, it is these entanglement shapes that create the possibility of molecules like DNA, which have special shapes and characteristics that can essentially lead to life. So entanglement is an incredible power that the universe has that allows it to create something so magical and wonderful from what might be considered just a simple set of particles. Now, entanglement is also fragile. If you bring certain particles together in certain configurations, especially if you cool something so that it becomes solidified into a solid, the actual entanglement between at least some of these things that I'm talking about is easily lost. So entanglement again has to do with a higher frequency of vibration. Cooling things tends to take the entanglement away. Okay, so I'm coming to kind of an end here. I just want to sort of, well, I want to talk about metaphors at this point in time, but I also want to tell you that what I'm going to talk about is actually more than just metaphors. And the reason is that what happens at the quantum level, certainly at the everyday level that we live our lives, there is no quantum physics going on here. There are no quantum fields. I mean, objects are objects, and that's how we interact with them. But what has happened is that during the course of evolution, and that's why I say an evolution is a spiral process, that the themes that were there at one time in evolution get repeated again and again. I mean, as I'm sure you've heard, evolution can be thought about as a process of differentiation, subjectivity, and communion, which means that things keep going apart and coming together in richer and richer ways. But also, we find that the idea of birth and death, the idea of an ecosystem that essentially nurtures life in different ways continues to come again and again in evolution. A galaxy is an ecosystem for stars. The Earth, our planet, is an ecosystem for life, and so on and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make here is that even though we are thinking about these as metaphors, in some sense, they are yet another iteration of a theme that permeates evolution. So I'm going to talk about these three things that I mentioned and try to now apply this to our psyches. Clearly our bodies are not quantum fields. We know that. But it feels as if a lot of what we consider to be our psyches do behave in some ways like the quantum fields that I'm talking about. So first of all, if we sort of look at our everyday life in our communities and our countries and so on, we find that our psyches seem to coalesce in groups. Just like creating a field effect would have. And so while these psyches don't have a lot of individuality to them, but once they are relational to other similar kinds of psyches, they tend to come together in islands and groups. And often these islands tend to get polarized. And, we see certainly a lot of that going on in our world today. And so what is needed for this relational field of psyches to emerge out of this kind of a polarized picture that I talked about is to kind of jolt them, just like we jolt a particle energy from one field into another field. We need to jolt some of these energies, from being part of one field of relationality to another field of relationality. I mean, what do I mean by that? I just want to give some examples, very quick examples from my own particular life. When I grew up in India, I lived, the first 25 years or so of my life in India. And I found myself in you can call it a field of psyches, which was very conforming, and I felt suffocated, and I thought I want to get out of it. And that, one of the reasons I came to this country here in the U.S. is because I felt that there was a lot of independence and so forth. So I jolted myself away from one, field of psyches to another field of psyches, and then I found found that what independence I had been dreaming about wasn't quite the way that I had imagined. And there's all sorts of ways in which we are not free, even in American society. And then I found myself that I was more comfortable in the field of scientist, so I found my own relational field there, and that started to feel uncomfortable after some point in time. And now I find myself in a relational field with my deep time colleagues and so on. So you know it's I'm trying to draw some metaphors here. And so relationality is a very key to how our psyches work, and we often sort of think that we have something that's independent of those relationships. But if we really think about it, a lot of what we consider to be who we are is really a result of what we have interacted with either in the past or what we find ourselves enmeshed in today. Let's talk a little bit about the oneness that I mentioned. Now, we know that mystics have long claimed that our psychic fields are embedded in oneness. Most religions, in some way or the other, talk about this. So, what would it take for our psyches to experience this oneness? Well, quantum physics tells us that it's the raising of our vibrational energies, or the quantum field vibrational energies, that does that. And so perhaps, in our own lives, we have to figure out what can elevate our own vibrational energies of psyches that we have, and what could enable that kind of a thing to happen, which will make us aware of this oneness and perhaps connect us to it in some ways. Because the fact is that there are layers and layers of identity that we have accumulated as we have grown up, and even through the process of cosmic evolution, that separate us from that oneness of the flaring core. And so to penetrate through those layers and to be able to access that amazing thing is something that will take some effort to do. And finally, I want to draw some metaphors here with the idea of entanglement. So the entanglement of psyches is in some ways like the entanglement of particles in quantum fields. Because when you when you want to truly feel entangled in our own environments, we too have to give up some of the individuality that we are so attached to. Just like a particle has to give up its individual properties if it is to be entangled with somebody else. But for us, that kind of an entanglement, I personally believe, means the development of empathy, the development of compassion, love, devotion towards others. That's what entanglement might mean in our world. And it also means that we go from what we might think of as certainty to what we think about as potentiality or possibility, which is again what entanglement is. It's a field of possibility, a pattern of possibility and potentiality. And so that is sometimes hard for us to do, is to leave some of that certainty behind us. And also, as I say here, when we really do that, we find that life is not so much of a struggle, or doesn't need to be so much of a struggle, but it's more a merging into a cosmic flow, or the oneness that we talked about before. So that's essentially what I have to say today. What I will end with, as I often want to do, is a personal experience that I had. Some of you, I think, are aware that I have two grandsons. They actually live in Scotland, where my daughter lives, and I go there fairly often to spend time with them. And I got a photo just a few days ago that my daughter sent to me. My youngest grandson is only 3 years old, and he is actually, getting kiddie training to play rugby. Apparently they have that sort of a thing. And the rugby coach has an incredible ritual that he does every time his students come to play. He says that I'm going to blow a whistle, and when I blow a whistle, I want each one of you to find someone else on that field or little room that they're in, and I want you to cuddle them. And so here is a photo that I received, which I was so enamored with and spoke so much to me. That's the coach blowing the whistle, and you see those little boys finding each other to hug and to cuddle. The one with that long black hair in the foreground is my grandson. So I call this game Kitty Entanglement. That's my own name for it. Thank you. And that's it for me. So love to have some questions and sharing.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I love kitty entanglement. That's a beautiful way to pull this together at a human level.
Absolutely, that's what I thought. So when
So,
I saw that photo, I thought that was it. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, exactly. We have a question in the chat already, and then if
Okay.
others have questions, um, I ask that you find on your Zoom toolbar, you'll see an icon down there on about the middle, perhaps, that says raise hand. And if you'll do that, that'll put you in queue and we'll be able to get to everybody in sequence.
And Bob,
John,
you might want to remove me from being spotlighted so we can see everybody.
okay, happy to do that. Where are you? There we go. Um, John
Here we go.
asks, I'm interested in the interface between life and non-life. For example, I've shown that gravity is necessary for evolution as the intersection of physics and biology. Perhaps we could discuss that.
Um, maybe if whoever wrote the question could say a little bit more as to how gravity relates to life and non-life. I think that might help.
Yeah, that
Okay,
was me.
that's John Torday here.
Torday.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, so I published a paper 25 years ago. I'm on faculty at UCLA. I'm a developmental molecular physiologist.
Mm,
And we had determined that there were certain physiologic properties of lungs and bones that had to do with physical distension. And I wondered to myself whether that had something to do with the gravitational principle. So there's a NASA device, it's a rotating wall vessel that you can
hmm
put individual cells in, and you can put them in free fall so that it's virtual zero gravity. And when you
mm.
do that, the cell loses its phenotype. Basically, it
Oh,
devolves. And then if you put the cell back in unit gravity, it reestablishes its phenotypic identity. So clearly, there are ways in which these cells are able to sense the force of gravity.
yes.
But more importantly, just to make the point, this, and there are two other laboratories who subsequently reproduced my own results, one of them in yeast, which was very interesting, actually. But my
Wow.
point is that this is the intersection of life and non-life. And I've extended that. I'm sorry, I meant to say I really loved your presentation. I couldn't have said it better myself, although I'm not a physicist, so I could. So you say it better than I do. But so I go to Fred Hoyle's stellar nucleosynthesis, the generation of stars, which gave rise to elements. The elements form along an exact line of identity from hydrogen to uranium in exactly their atomic mass. That's the logic of the cosmos. And the way
hmm
we as biologic beings have adopted that is what Lynn Sagan Margulis had shown back beginning in 1967, and that is what's called symbiogenesis. The way
Mm,
cells, and her example, what she started with was how bacteria were adopted by archaea to form eukaryotes, the class we belong
yes.
to, which have a true nucleus, and the bacteria became mitochondria. But there's a long history of that. It's now considered to be correct.
Yes.
So now you have the assimilation of the physical into the biologic to
Yeah.
form something that has agency and has will and that
Yep.
can consider its own being. So I thought maybe I'd ask how you could sort of how you would see that from your perspective as a
Okay.
physicist.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you've touched a vast topic here, which within the time that we have, and I do want to make sure that other people get a chance to ask as well. I don't think I can really do justice to that question. I think it's a wonderful question. It's a very important question. So I'll say a little bit from my perspective, and I'm not a biologist either. So, my perspective is more from the physics point of view. Um, my own feeling is that the way that life is defined is rather, should I say, parochial in some sense. In this, um, I think that life perhaps is a little bit more general than the way that we tend to think of it, especially from the perspective of biology. And so I think that the line between life and no life is very flexible, very, very fluid. Some people might think of a virus, for example, as not a living thing. Other people think of it as a living thing. My own personal bias is towards thinking more in terms of agency that a particular um, unit has. And I think that agency actually grows all the way from a particle, an atom, a molecule, and so on to who we are today with all sorts of, um, consciousness and will and so forth. And so to me, an atom has a certain amount of agency, certainly not the kind of agency that we have, but I believe that an atom, as I explained, can actually distinguish between certain kinds of light and other kinds of light. And it can make a decision whether to absorb a certain frequency of light or not to absorb it. Not too different from a living cell that decides to allow a certain kind of chemical to penetrate its membrane while other chemicals do not penetrate the membrane. So, from my perspective, I think that there is just a continuum that we have here, and there is no clear line between non-life and non-life. And the other thing that I would say is that life has adapted to the conditions on Earth, which includes gravity. I mean, gravity is something that we have. Our muscles are basically configured so that they can withstand the gravity that exists on the earth. And I believe that is even true for smaller entities like living cells and so on. So I'm not surprised that you tell me that when you subject them to the lack of gravity, that they would actually lose certain characteristics that they have. That seems very natural to me if these things are a product of evolution here on our planet Earth. So that may not answer all your questions, but hopefully it has some connection with what you're saying.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarbmeet.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Carolyn Millian, yes, please. Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. The first, I think, will be quite quick. Is there a relationship between what you call potentiality and potential energy that we learned about in physics versus kinetic energy? Second question is, you talked
Yeah.
about entanglement and how, we can resonate, that entanglement is wonderful. What about disentanglement? And what comes about as a consequence of disentanglement? Could you speak to that as well? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, the potential word. The potential word is really a word of English. So whatever we attach it to takes on the meaning of what potential really means. When we talk about potential energy, we're literally talking about energy that has the potential to manifest itself into kinetic energy. For example, when you hold an object up, at a certain say, we say that it has potential energy. And the reason that we say that is because if you do drop it, it will start to gain kinetic energy, which is motion energy. So while it's up there, it has that potential to gain the energy. So it's not exactly the same thing because when we talk about the potentiality of quantum fields, we are literally talking about the potential for that quantum field to manifest itself in all sorts of different ways. One of them being, having a particle inside it and so forth. So it's still that same idea of potential, but it is also different. So that's what I would say. And then for your other question, which remind me once again, the other question.
Disentanglement.
Oh, the disentanglement, of course, the disentanglement. Well, here's an example. If you take an atom and if you which is an entangled particle, And if you want to disentangle it, what you really have to do is you have to then probe it with some kind of a mechanism that, for example, can attract the electron to it. So it can rob the electron from the atom and then leave just a proton back there or something like that. When you do that, the entanglement breaks. And we say that it's disentangled. There are other words for it like coherence and non-coherence and so on as well. But if you want to talk about metaphorically, in my view, the potential that an atom had of doing all these wonderful things that I talked about is now gone. It's lost. So disentanglement to me means the loss of potentiality or the loss of possibilities that exist when entanglement is maintained. So I would leave it at that. I hope that's helpful. Okay. Terry has a question, I think. Yeah.
I saw that and the hand went away. Terry, did you
Nope.
still have a question?
Hand is still there. Well, at least it is on my screen.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, actually, the question that was just brought up somewhat relates to what I wanted to ask about, and the statement that a hydrogen atom represents the entanglement of a proton and electron.
Mhm.
Seems to me, it's that. So if nothing else, that is a very simple,
Mhm.
almost trivial representation of entanglement. The way I'm trying to learn more about it.
Mhm.
I've been disabled by the fact that I did quantum physics for a long time. I did calculations on atoms and molecules, predicting their
Mhm.
properties and so on.
Mhm.
When nobody used the word entanglement, and so I'm trying to figure out why I need the word entanglement. And one of the things that I think is most of us find mysterious is, and you alluded to it briefly, which was the distance at which the entanglement can be manifested.
Right.
Um, and that continues to be somewhat of a mystery to me. I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about how that happens, and why my intuition tells me that if the electron gets far enough away from the proton, and you said the entanglement breaks, but it break in that case, it breaks because one gets too far away from the other.
No, 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 not because of that. That's what I was trying to say, that you can take particles as far away from each other as you possibly can across the galaxy, and the entanglement will not break. Entanglement breaks more from an intrusion
Yeah,
into
okay,
that
I
connection.
get that part. You have to
Okay, okay.
you have to induce some, like, an ionization process or something.
Right, right, right.
That's,
Exactly.
yeah. So you said something about there having to be a burst or
A
something.
jolt is what I said, but
A jolt.
that was a metaphorical word. Yeah.
Right. So the entanglement of an atom, you're saying, persists as long as I don't provide this jolt.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so is the issue, though, that if you get far enough away, the size of the jolt that's required to disentangle gets lower?
Uh,
I mean, there's
mm,
things like the ionization potential and whatnot. Uh,
yeah. By the way, I mean, I always try to use words that are more English-like, but the physics word for what I describe, what I was calling a jolt, is collapse, right? It's a collapse of the wave function, if you know what
yeah,
I'm talking
yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So what causes the collapse of that wave function can be many different things. But simply taking them further apart doesn't necessarily qualify as one of them. I mean, it could in certain cases, it could, but it has to be something more than that usually. And so, in terms of the mystery that things can be so far apart and yet have this connection between them, is something that we don't fully understand, even from a physics perspective, but we we simply see it as a reality of quantum physical objects, and so we accept it and we know how to describe it with our equations. But it remains a certain mystery, in a sense that, from Einstein's viewpoint, for example, things that are so far apart cannot instantly connect to each other because it violates the speed of light, which is a maximum speed limit. What we find, though, is that there is no way to use that link between entangled particles to actually convey a causal connection between those 2 points. And so we are not actually violating Einstein's theory when we talk about entanglement. But what you're talking about is something that gets talked and debated a lot, and there aren't any very clear answers to that.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's good to know I'm justified in my confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason
Thank you
why we
very much.
call entanglement a mysterious thing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Your presentation was outstanding.
Oh, you're very welcome. And Bonnie has her hand up.
Yes. Go ahead, Bonnie, unmute yourself.
There. Sarbmeet, every time you talk, I get so excited because of the overlap between the way you speak about quantum physics or the cosmos and relational neuroscience and how we operate as humans. And so
Yes.
when you're talking about entanglement and disentanglement, that's the whole way attachment happens inside
Mm,
humans is through mirror neuron resonance with those around us, and it's built right into our brains. And when we
wow.
get that in a resonant way, our system becomes integrated and we discover our differentiated qualities and we develop a deep subjectivity. And when it
Yeah.
isn't disentanglement, we have so much pain, so much trauma and all of that. So when the principles of the cosmos dovetail into our brains, I just get very excited. And then at a spiritual level too, the transmission of consciousness from a spiritually awake person to another person, again through this mirror neuron resonance that then remakes our neurobiology in a permanent way, and that we carry these people forward with us. So thank you again. It makes me tearful to sense how much the cosmos is right in our whole embodied brain.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying it, because, with your knowledge, you said it in a way that I could never have said it. But hearing you say that just sort of resonates with me and strengthens, the whole idea that I'm trying to convey here. So thank you so much for that. And
I-
Marilyn has her hand up.
Yep.
Yes, hi. I have to admit, I'm a little confused. It's not.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
sure.
mean, it's a lot to take in for someone who's not scientifically oriented. But one, I just wanted to ask you, because I didn't take notes. You had a couple of slides where you gave metaphors to the psyche, the human
Mhm.
psyche versus
Yeah.
what you were describing as physics, and that
Yes.
the field is the determinant of the particle. So from a psychic perspective, we identify with certain groups, which contributes to a lot of division. So when you've just started now talking about disentanglement and jolts and all that, I'm just curious, do you have an opinion for what kind of a jolt would it take for somebody as an individual tied to a particular field to be able to move to another field? Just curious.
Okay, that's a reasonable question. Um, and I think, this is also a kind of a question that different people may have different answers to it. Um, for me, a jolt could be a spiritual experience that you encounter in certain situations where, um, perhaps you are under a certain amount of stress, or something like that, and suddenly something just bursts open for you that you had been neglecting for a long time, and you suddenly realize that you don't belong in that psychic field, as I call it. I mean, that's just my terminology. the psychic field that you were a part of, that you don't belong there, and that your energy, your psychic energy, needs to move from that, quote unquote, quantum field to a different one. And, I certainly have had situations in my life where it had suddenly dawned upon me that I need to move my energy somewhere else. So that's my description of a jolt, but maybe others have other ways of looking at it. Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you. Sylvia, go ahead and unmute yourself, please. And there you go.
Um, would you say that the noosphere is an evolving field of entanglement?
Mm. Yes. I mean, again, noosphere is a term that isn't very well defined in some sense. I mean, we talk about a collective consciousness, and in that sense, I think we now have the ability to not only entangle in small groups, like we generally did, face to face or in person. We now have the ability to entangle across the globe through through the technology and the internet and so forth. So to me, we now have a way to extend that entanglement to a different level. And so the noosphere perhaps could be conceived of as that expansion of the scale and scope of that kind of entanglement. And so, yeah, in that sense, the noosphere is an expansion of entanglement. Sure.
Thank you.
All right, Ellen, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Oh, I just wanted to ask about the space-time continuum.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
We're
please.
we're
Is
here
it
yeah.
You mean what is it? Is that what you're asking? What
Well,
is the space-time?
we're in a space-time continuum right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to know if you could talk about it as a whole. Is it a force field? Is it?
Yes, it is a force field for sure. One of the things that we have uncovered with space-time is, actually through Einstein's theory, is that we don't need to be thinking about gravity as a force anymore. Gravity is, in fact, what Einstein called it the curvature of space-time. And so, in a sense, space-time, as I said in my talk earlier on, is far from being just a container. It's much more than that. And in fact, in this sense, you could almost think of the space-time as as having an embrace on us that can essentially bring us together. I mean, I'm now talking physics. I'm not even talking about, human togetherness. I'm just saying that two objects are brought together not because there is a force pulling them together, but because there is a embrace of space and time, that continuum that you talk about around them, that is pressing them to be closer to each other. So it's a whole different metaphor, a whole different way of looking at space and time, but that's much more accurate to what we now understand space and time to be.
So, like calling on your ancestors or thinking of who comes after you, is that working on the space-time continuum? Like believing that your ancestors, can help you. I'm getting into.
Well, yeah, I know it's a little hard for me to answer a question like that, but I will tell you one thing, and then you can sort of make of it whatever you think is appropriate. But just recently, there's been a burst of activity. And I didn't even mention this in my talk because it will take me a little further away. But physicists are now talking about entanglement, not just across space, but entanglement across time. That's a whole new field that is budding up. There's papers being written on that. And, in fact, there was just recently, I saw a whole bunch of stuff on that. So one can now wonder, what does that mean, the entanglement across time? And so that might speak a little bit to your idea about ancestors.
And angels. Okay,
Yes,
thank you,
absolutely.
thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, Karen, so wonderful to see you.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be here. And it was actually, I kept thinking, I was just listening to something yesterday concerning our microbiome in our bodies
Mm.
that kept coming up as you were giving your presentation. And then when Bonnie said what she said about the whole thing about motor neurons and relationships, I was like, okay, I just need to give words to what I'm hearing here.
Mm.
What they were doing in this tape that I was listening to is that they were saying that in the human genome, we kept trying to figure out which genes we could adjust so that we could take care of a lot of the human diseases. Um, and what they discovered is that really humans don't have that many genes compared to an earthworm, for example.
Oh,
I mean, an
wow.
earthworm's got many more genes than we do.
Mm.
But in our bodies, we have the genetic material of viruses and so many different kinds of bacteria and on and on and on, that our bodies are actually made up of communities of life forms that we are dependent upon to realize our potential, even to digest, and then to be able to support every system of the human experience, our consciousness, our spirituality. Everything is related to how those other life forms and our human genetic and cellular interactions fit and work together. And when you get a breakdown of, for example, the whole microbiome, our human potential just tanks in all of those ways. And there's something about what you've been describing and what Bonnie was describing that has me go, oh my gosh, there's a whole physical counterpart to this entanglement and to the oneness
Yes,
that we
yes.
humans embody. So just want to
Hmm.
give voice to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen, for bringing it up. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Karen. Elaine, I think we have time for one more question. Is your question
Yes, I have
concise?
a brief question. Mystics have been, since Edward Carpenter at the end of the 19th century, talked about cosmic consciousness. And is that a level of consciousness that I really enjoyed your presentation, would actually account for the entanglement at the universal level? In other words, I am present to what is everywhere in the universe. That's a cosmic consciousness.
Yeah. um, Consciousness is another of those words that you have to sort of be so careful with, especially these days. There's so many connotations associated with it and lots of baggage as well. So I tend to be very careful in how I use the word.
Yes.
Um, Entanglement at the physical level, which is what I described in the beginning, is an entanglement that, in some sense, permeates our universe. Because it's, when we had the flaring forth, it was a flaring forth of particles that were entangled with each other right from the beginning, because there was no intrusion that was there to break that entanglement. As the universe has evolved, we now have other structures, like a planet, possibly even a star, where you can't quite talk about the same kind of entanglement that may have existed at the beginning of the universe. So it really has to do with the kind of entanglement we want to bring into the picture. I mean, when you talk about consciousness, I'm not always sure about what it is that we are talking about. Is it some kind of a connection between material bodies, or is it something that is outside of the material range in a kind of a, you know, quantum field sense in some ways. So unless you pin down some of those things, it's very difficult for me to answer a question about cosmic consciousness. And as you know, that's a very wide topic.
It's a very
So,
wide topic. It's
yeah. So
but
I
it,
think that's about as much as I would say here.
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. All right. All
Oh,
yours, Bob.
all right. Well, what can I say but my own huge thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
this is always a delight for me because I have a certain amount of science and interest in science in my background, but I still am with, I think, everyone else on this call, really working to take in what you've said. And but every step is insightful and enlightening, and one more step closer um, to understanding. And so, huge gratitude for all that
Thank
you
you.
bring
Thank you.
to this work and to us today in particular. Um, and so, to wrap up today, our dear friend Gail Ransom is offering us a chant, an original chant that she is ready to take us out with. Is there anything you need to say, Gail, before we start?
As I thought of our Sarbmeet's themes, and mostly as I've heard the responses now, it is a poem that from Hafiz, which is out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There is a field. I'll meet you there. And that's the words I put to music and some images too.
All right.
Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Out beyond ideas of wrong living and right living, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Oh, I'll beyond ideas of wrong believing and right believing. I'll beyond wrong expressing and right confessing. Beyond right pleasing and wrong teasing. Beyond right loving and wrong loving. Out beyond be good leaders and wrong leaders, beyond a loving core and a taste for war. Wrong cultures and wrong contexts, wrong clothing and right outfits, long jobless and short days. Push, press, click, run, stop, sleep, more, less, more, press on. out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There is a field, I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there.
Thank you so much, Gail. That was made for this afternoon's talk. Thank you so much, Sarbmeet, for joining us. And as you can tell, the field is full.
That's right.
I'll close with these words. And again, Sarbmeet has an upcoming two-part series starting next week. If you go to Deep Time Network, you'll find out more about that. And Cosmic Vespers will be back in September. Big gratitude to the team for making this field so wonderful. And I'll close with this. Let what we've touched here ripple gently outward, not as answers, but invitations. Listen more deeply, move with care. Let wonder find us in small, quiet places. Go slowly, trust the field to hold what we do not yet understand. Thank you and thank you.
Bye-bye.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sarbmeet, thank you, Penny, for all this, putting this